Hi, everyone. Welcome to a very special episode of the Lighthouse Sessions. I have my dear friend Mark Halpern with me, and today we're going to talk about legacy and specifically Dr. Paul Goldstein's legacy. So first of all, Mark, let's talk a little bit about the work that you do, and then we'll talk about how Dr. Paul shaped your view of the world.
Thank you, Jeff. And it's great to be back. I really appreciate it. It's you have a great audience and you have a great format. So I really appreciate being part of your orbit. My background is I've been in professional practice for 35 years. I have a company called wealthinsurance.com. Here in Canada, although we do work in the United States as well. And I like to tell people that I started when I was actually 11, Jeff. And I think, my father died at the age of 50 when I was 11 of a heart attack. I was the youngest of 4 boys. My mother, who was 48 at the time, had to go back to work to support our family. Why? My dad loved us very much, but he was a busy engineer. Unfortunately, he had no will, very little savings, and no life insurance. So it was really hard for us. We had to, I saw my mom had to struggle, but we had to develop a struggle muscle ourselves. But fast forward, I work with some of Canada's most successful business owners, entrepreneurs, and affluent families, and regular civilians. And you'd think they'd have everything all organized and together. And you and I both know, Jeff, it's not true. Everyone's so busy and everyone's got ADD today that I'd suggest that 85% of the time it's not true. They don't have things together. They don't have wills in place. They don't realize what happens if you don't have a will or powers of attorney or an estate directory where everything is. So basically we do 3 things. We do estate planning, which is making sure that people's financial architecture and their financial furniture actually aligns with reality. So that would be looking at things like wills, structures, tax, etc. Second area that we're involved with is tax mitigation strategies. And we specialized in permanent tax-exempt life insurance strategies that people know what insurance is, but very few people understand what it does. So we help to educate them that way. And then the third area that we're involved with, Jeff, is really philanthropy, is helping people create enduring legacies, often just by converting tax into charity. So we use house money, and most people are still just giving checks, cash, and credit cards, but don't realize that those are the worst ways of giving, that there are so many more efficient ways of giving. And we love giving people that aha moment or, wow, I didn't know that. And then we work with their professionals and with our team to make sure that they're preserving family money or maximizing their income or being more tax efficient.
I love that. Now, let's pivot slightly. I'd like you to do me the honor and introduce Dr. Paul Goldstein in his absence.
Sure, absolutely. So just a little bit about Paul Goldstein, and then I'll tell you how we met, which I think is great. Dr. Paul Goldstein passed away in February 18th of 2025. So it's just been a year since his passing. He died at the age of 91. He was a force of nature, a Holocaust survivor. He was born in Belgium, actually was in hiding. His parents put him in hiding with him and he was 10 at the time, his brother was 6, and they hid him in a non-Jewish family's home, who turned out to be a sadistic family. Unfortunately, it helped to define a lot of his struggles as well. And he eventually survived that, as did his parents. They survived the Holocaust as well. He came to Canada with nothing, got married, and in my industry, which is the insurance industry, he achieved notoriety as being a member of something called the Top of the Table. The Top of the Table is part of the $1 Million Round Table, which is like an international organization. But to get to the top of the table, it means that you're 1% of the professional marketplace. He did that for 40 consecutive years. 40 consecutive years. So not only was that, but then he's crazy. At the age of 80, after having professional success, he wanted to go back to school because he had a philosophy around that as well, which we'll talk about. And he went back to U of T to get his master's. And of course, he was 80 at the time, so they wouldn't just let him in. He had to take a couple of undergraduate courses too. He got into a master's program, finished with an A+ average, the first A+ in 6 years, and he was the top of his class. Remember, this is an 80-year-old guy. Then he got his PhD at the age of 86 from Ariel University in Israel, a PhD at age 86.
Wow.
And then at age 88, he had his first academic book published from Cambridge Scholars Publishers on the Balfour Declaration, like on a history of the Middle East, like not like, soft, easy subject matter, very, very
Yeah.
technical. And this is a guy who just inspired me beyond that. Wow, don't stop, don't turn the wheels off, there's a lot more to, so yeah, so that's his background, and his story is just remarkable in how we met, and I'm looking forward to sharing that and his wisdom as well.
I love that. And I think a lot of people will say, oh, I'm too old for that. And it's like, you're only too old if you believe you're too old.
That's so true, Jeff. You and I I think we're around the same vintage. I think I'm a little older than you. I'm going to be 64. How old are you?
I'm 54. So
yeah,
we're
okay,
close.
So in 120 months, you'll look like me, basically.
I hope I preserve that well.
But it goes by fast. And yeah, I think a lot of people sort of, this idea of retirement is one of the stupidest things I've ever heard, I read a very good book by Arnold Schwarzenegger recently called, and his advice was, you have to live a life where you're always useful, be useful.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, it's, he definitely inspired me, and he inspired a lot of people. And I think it's something that all of us should really be thinking about, that you have different pivots in life, different pivots and adjustments that you make. But the idea is you ratchet up from where you came from, and you use that new wisdom and knowledge to be able to do more. And it's kind of like they always say, you climb a mountain, get to the top, when you realize, oh my gosh, there's another mountain on the other side of that mountain. So we never stop, that's for sure.
I love it. And I think it's fascinating, I'm going to paraphrase, but seeing Dr. Paul, he obviously, being a Holocaust survivor, learned to deal with extreme hardship and built some resilience out of it. It's amazing how that can drive people to succeed, or it can drive people to crumble, and not comparing waiting in line at Starbucks to being a Holocaust survivor. But some people today, if they have to wait more than 5 minutes at Starbucks, they are ruined for the day. They got to go home and have a sulk.
How about a parking spot too far away from the entrance?
Oh my God, I had to walk across the street.
We've definitely become softer. We're not as hardy as the generations before. It's a challenge, especially with the youth today. We have to, we want to give them what we didn't have, but at the same time, we don't want to give them a sense of entitlement that they have to work.
Yeah, I love it. Now, let's talk about Dr. Paul's legacy in your life, because I think he's impacted you well beyond the day-to-day of your work. I think I'm going to guess you probably had some foundations and you were naturally leaning towards philanthropy, but I'm guessing he helped you raise that motivation a little.
Yeah, it's actually interesting how we met. I was prospecting somebody that I knew, a very successful business owner, and they said, "Listen, Mark, we like you very much, but we have an advisor, and we would never change advisors." I said, "Yeah, what's his name?" "Paul Goldstein." I hadn't heard the name before, and I said, "Wow, that's so nice that you say that. What's so special about him?" And they said one word: his integrity. I said, wow, what a beautiful way to describe somebody. Imagine. So I said, I was 10 years into my career at that time. I was kind of at a crossroads. I wasn't sure if I was going to be living here. I was thinking about moving to Jerusalem. I had connections there, sort of had one foot in one world, one foot in another world, not sure. And I said, you know what? I'm going to call this Paul Goldstein up. He sounds fascinating. Maybe he could help me, make this decision. At the same time, maybe we could collaborate on business together. He's so successful. I know people, but I maybe am not as well versed in those ultra high net worth space, and maybe we could work together. So I decided, Jeff, to cold call him. So I picked up the phone. Like back in the olden days, you remember a phone as opposed to texting or a WhatsApp message. And he picked up, and he had an accent, a little bit of an accent from being from Belgium, right? And we spoke. I introduced myself. I said, I'm married. I have kids, 5 kids, and I heard about him from this client, and I just wondering whether he might have some time to get together. I'd like to discuss where I am in my career. Maybe he could help me, and maybe we could collaborate together. And he says, well, I'm really busy. I'm really sorry. I just don't have any time. And I was shocked. I kind of thought, okay, I'm a nice guy. Like, cut me some slack. Give me a nickel, But he was very busy. And I said, listen, Paul, I totally appreciate you're busy, but listen, I just want half an hour of your time. I'll meet anywhere at any time. You just tell me where. And I don't want to, cause you any interruption of your life. So he paused. He said, okay. He said, you sound like a fine young man. He says, I'll meet you, but it's on my terms. I said, sure, whatever you want. He said, there's a track, like a running track behind the ice skating rink at the Forest Hill Arena in Toronto, down in Midtown. He said, meet me there on Sunday morning at 9:30. We'll walk and we'll talk. I said, great. So I told my wife I'm meeting with Paul Goldstein. How exciting. And I showed up. Anyway, Paul was like 5'0", stocky. He was actually a former Olympian weightlifter as well. Got tremendous. Wow. His health was something he always was driven by. And we ended up walking and talking that day for 10 and a half miles, 4.5 hours, Jeff. We walked together. I was bruised. Really, I had bruises on my shins because I was wearing like running shoes, that you get in the bin at Canadian Tire that are already tied up, and it was fascinating. And we ended up walking and talking. And from there, we walked and talked for the next 25 years, such to the point that when Paul passed away in February, guess who his successor of his business was?
Wow.
Me. And he had a business that were made up of former finance ministers, gold medal Olympians, people whose names are on hospitals down University Avenue. It was a very significant clientele base, which comes to tell us, again, a very important point for everybody who's listening. A lot of us are going to get no's, and people are going to say, sorry. And for most people, they'll say, oh, well, so sad, too bad, and they'll hang up the phone. But imagine if I would have hung up the phone. Like, I wouldn't have had this opportunity to meet him and learn from him. And I also wouldn't have had the opportunity to give him the peace of mind knowing that his business was going to be well taken care of long after he went. So that's kind of the humble beginnings. But those 25 years together were just fascinating in terms of our conversations and the wisdom that he shared with me.
I love that. And I just love that the whole thing started with a very long walk. And by the way, I think a lot of people would say, oh, this is too much work. I'm going to quit. I'm going to stop. I'm going to slow down. So I applaud you for persevering, even though you didn't have the right footwear. But clearly, sometimes when something's meant to be, we know. I'm sure I've met a few people where the minute I meet them, I know that something special is going to come of it. And I'm guessing you knew that from that moment.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure I knew that, I was with somebody who had much more life experience than I did and a lot more success than I did. And, there's two ways to go. You can, trip and fall and skin your knee hundreds of times on your own, or you can find people who have tripped and fallen and skinned their knees many times before you, who will help you not trip and fall and skin your knee, and you can maybe get somewhere faster and more efficient than doing it on your own. Because it's, there's that whole area of mentorship and finding somebody who can be a bit of a guide is unfortunately been lost a lot because we're living in a different world with social media and lack of connection with real people, and just everybody has ADD today, Jeff. It's like, if you call and have a long-winded how dare you, or you send an email with 2 paragraphs. It's like, how dare you? You send a WhatsApp message that has 1 minute and 12 seconds and you think, how dare you? So there are a lot of challenges out there, but if you have the persistency and you have the desire, and you really have the desire for the right reasons, it manifests itself and great things will happen, like meeting Paul Goldstein.
I love that, and for what it's worth, I'm working and mentoring my own kids, because I think a lot, a lot of the parents I talk to say, "Oh, school should do this," and I kept looking at these gaps, going, "But they won't." So if the school won't do it, it's going to fall to the person who cares the most about these kids. So you and I think, have a lot in common, because for me, I don't care about my own personal legacy, other than the fact that, how do I make the lives of my kids better, and what skills do I need to teach them, so that they're not starting out. When I left home and went out in the world, I came from a farming background. I didn't know a thing about business. My kids are learning business in the car every day with me, because we talk about it.
Amazing. Well, I heard something recently. You'll love this, Jeff. It was a group of parents with their sons and talking about the future with one of their spiritual leaders. And they were all talking about university and going to the States, and, very expensive, investments, right? And I went to university. To me, it was, I majored in pleasure. So I don't think I got a lot out of it. I was not a academic. I spent a lot of time, playing video arcades and in the bar and whatnot. But what he said was, the spiritual leader, it was a rabbi, said, better you find what are your kids interested in, and find someone in your community that is the north on the compass in this, and reach out to them and say, how much is the university? How many years is it going to be? 4 years at 20,000. That's $80,000, right? Let's say $100,000. If you go to the States, go up to that professional and say, listen, my son is interested in your business. Here's $100,000. Please take him under your wing for the next 4 years and mentor him. And that $100,000 will probably be much better spent that way, by getting real life experience. Anyway, just a sidebar.
I love that, and I think I learned a lot in university. Mostly, it was about what not to do. Again, times were a little different back then, but it's most of the deep life lessons I've learned were from mentors, and it's fascinating, because a lot of people, again, even when it comes to mentors, oh, they're too busy, I can't ask. I was always asking, and if they said no, they said no. But I also came at it from, how can I help you? Because most people are like, how can you help me? So
yeah, and I agree with you. You have to have a little bit of what we call in Jewish chutzpah, right? Chutzpah is, you gotta have a little bit of guts, and you're gonna fail at times, and you're gonna fall at times, as we're gonna go through some Paul euphemisms we'll go through. But there are two types of people that he would always say. There's winners and there's learners. There's no such thing as losers. The people who are the most successful are the ones who have failed the most compared to everybody else out there. And I have a lot more failures than successes. And I look at each one of those as a beautiful, shiny gem that's helped me, as I said, to ratchet and pivot as you go through life.
Well, it's funny, because I don't trust somebody who hasn't failed. And that's, to me, it says you haven't tried hard enough, you haven't fallen flat on your face. I've learned more from the misses than from the successes.
Yeah, I agree. Which brings us to Paul and some of his wisdom.
So let's talk about how you're carrying on Paul's legacy. So let's talk a little bit about that. What are some of your favorite Paulisms? I'm sure, I find once upon a time, words were a little more scarce, so people thought them through. Personally, I think Winston Churchill is one of the most quotable people on the planet. We don't seem to have those epic quotes anymore, because everybody's going for the short soundbite. But what are some of the favorite things you remember Paul saying or teaching you?
Yeah, so you know what? in all those 25 years, first of all, he told a lot of good jokes, and they were generally he'd give me advance warning if it was something that would be, offside, very, but and we also played a lot of word games, Jeff. I know this is crazy, but we spent a lot of time. He had a game called Spoof, and we spent hours playing it. And what it was you would pick a letter. I'd start off with, let's say, with A, and then you'd have to add another letter to it. And the objective of the game is to get your opponent to spell a word, and if they do, they're out.
Oh,
So it's kind
clever.
of like you think about, geography, right?
Yeah.
But here it's like you try to get them out, and it was a fascinating game because Paul, he was a PhD. He wrote an academic text. He's brilliant. He knew the 198 countries in the world, and he knew every capital, even in his 90s. So you went up to him and said, "What's the capital of Kachakafak, whatever you want to come Chinese, and he'd say it's Waka Waka Wee Wee, whatever, and you look it up, and he knew it. Like, it's amazing thing. So I think, always sharpening the stone is good. He really did that, and it was very impressive. But here's a guy who went through a lot of challenges in life, and as you said, there's two ways to deal with them. Either you rise above, or you crumble and fall. And he was a big fan of boxing, Jeff. He loved boxing, just the whole idea of the man to man, and he loved to tell the story of going to a fight in Montreal at the center there. I guess now it's called the Bell Center, but he went to Montreal, and Archie Moore, who was the reigning heavyweight champion in 1956, was fighting against a guy named Yvon Duray. Yvon Duray was a Nova Scotian boxer, huge guy, looked like a lumberjack. So he was obviously the crowd favorite. And Paul, who's a youngster, went to this boxing match, and you can actually look it up. Go onto YouTube and watch the fight. It's fascinating. But basically, in the first 10 rounds, Yvon Duray knocked down Archie Moore, 10 rounds in a row. So Archie Moore, the reigning world champion, gets knocked down. And around the 10th round or so, Archie Moore noticed that Yvon Duray was tiring, and he sort of got out of his rope-a-dope or whatever, and then started pummeling Yvon, and he ended up knocking him out and retaining his world championship, which was amazing because you can actually see the fight. It's in black and white. So what was so special about this fight? Paul said that your life is you're going to be going into a boxing ring. You're going into a boxing ring, and you are going to get hit. You don't go into a boxing rink to drink tea, right? You are going to get hit, and you're going to get knocked down. And when you get knocked down, you have two choices: stay down for 9 seconds or 10 seconds, or stay down and be out. So the reality is you're going to get hit in life. You're going to get knocked down, and it's okay to stay down. You can wallow in, whatever it is, whatever you're going through emotionally, physically, whatever it is, you have to deal with that, and it's okay. But the key to life is you're going to get knocked down. Just don't get knocked out. Don't get knocked out. So, it's kind of, it helps you now as a young person or even an older person, just to know, we're here to get into this ring. And there are some people who avoid that ring, and, they never get to be world champions. They just, they take the back door, right? But, and I know from sort of the school of hard knocks that, you got to get in there. And that means being married, and having a boss and raising children and dealing with PTA and, whatever it is your mission in life, and the naysayers. So just know that when you do get that punch, it's okay. It hurts when somebody hits you in the nose, but don't call it a day. Anyway, that was he loved boxing. He always used boxing analogies.
Well, I think it is the perfect analogy, because it's whoever gets up the most. It's not how many times you get knocked down, it's how many times you get back up that matters. And, I think a lot of people see getting knocked down as failure, but really it's feedback, it's a lesson. And how do I avoid that punch going forward?
Well,
Or
Paul, you said, yeah, Paul was, he wasn't, he was a very spiritual person, not necessarily a religious person, but it's funny, he knew scriptures and he knew all of the books on, let's say, Jewish wisdom without ever having read them, just because he lived them. Like, in other words, it was just organic. Like, he knew, what was the proper way to go. And we have something in Jewish text called Ethics of Our Fathers, which is kind of like the psychology of relationships between man and man, man and himself, man and God. And one of them says that a righteous person falls down 7 times and gets up. A righteous person falls down 7 times and gets up. You can apply that righteous person to whatever, a success, whatever. But the point is that in order to be righteous, you must fall down 7 times. So what you said is so right on, Jeff. It's like some people, they don't want to even attempt, or they'll fall down 1 time and they'll walk away. But the only way to become that great person is through the fall.
Well, and I find it fascinating because, again, I've met some people who got lucky once in business and they came out of it going, man, I'm good. And then the minute they get a little bit of adversity, they crumble and fall. Whereas the kind of people who, as you said, the righteous, have been knocked down 7 times, you get back up 7 times. You're pretty steady on your feet going forward.
100%. Look, I just went out this morning, Jeff. My oldest son and my youngest daughter got married within 12 days of each other this past month in 2 different countries. So it was quite a busy time for us. But I took out my daughter for coffee this morning because she's off. She's going to be, she's married now. She's going to be moving away. And when she used to come home from school, I would always ask her the same question. I would say, D or ND? So D or ND? And that was our D meant drama, or ND meant no drama, right? So if she had drama, I wanted to hear about it, right? Like, what were the challenges? And then what she really always reminds me of is that she's a very big perfectionist. And when she would fail and, let's say, not do well, and I would take her out for a celebration. We would go to we go to Dutch's Dreams at Bathurst in St. Clair. If you haven't been there, it's an amazing ice cream. And we go there to celebrate with big sundae, cherry, whipped cream, all of that, to celebrate her failure, and she loved that because, you can start taking yourself way too seriously, and you shouldn't. Like, how many of us remember what grade they got on their algebra in grade 7? Or, I always told my kids that school, the reason that you're in school is it's there to teach you that in life, you have to do things you're not going to want to do. That's what school is all about. It's teaching you that in life, you're going to have to do things that you don't want to do. And that's life. You got to get up and get the bottle for the baby. You got to get and take the garbage out. You got to pay your taxes. You got to, anyway. That's
I love it.
All stuff.
Now, I promised your assistant Kara that I'd keep you on time, and we're at time. We will do this again. Is there anything we'd like to cover next time about Dr. Paul in particular that you want to put on the recording so we don't forget?
Absolutely. So I'd say that we mentioned about the boxing ring, but let's talk about how do you actually deal with adversity? Not just so how can you rise above it? Like we're going to talk about a great analogy that he has and the resources that we have to make sure that we're not focusing on stuff we can't do anything about, and then also he also had, like, there were sort of 3 areas in your life. If you want to live a life of happiness, there are 3 areas to focus on. And he had a way to measure where you're at now with that and how you can build on that. And what happens if it's sort of out of alignment? Like, how do you deal with these 3 areas going forward? And then I'd like to talk about, what he taught me with regards to mentorship and how I'm sort of translating that into my mentorship and coaching program and the work that I'm doing with charity, because he was a big fan of a famous Greek general by the name of Pericles, and he said that he was going to keep on his tombstone, he was going to have it engraved with a quote of Pericles that he had, that we'll talk about next time around, that I think is something that we should all be sort of navigating our lives towards.
I love it. Well, Mark, thank you for being on the show and talking about Dr. Paul.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeff.